Welcome to the What's Up Host Show, Chap, and today we'll be talking about the Alex DeBrincat saga. It's day 395 and a half, and we will be getting into it. But listen, um, it's not really 395 days and a half, but it seems like it. So my co-host on my Red Alert podcast, which is the Detroit Red Wings podcast, I'll put the link below. Um, she said that this deal is going to be done. And one of the things that's hampering it is the contract negotiations, which is normal, especially when you're talking about a restricted free agent and a long term deal, especially with Stevie Y. We see what happened with Dylan Larkin. Kevin Allen later was on a podcast or something. I seen something on Twitter, audio snippet of what he was on, and he said the contract negotiations are being held up by Stevie Y, not like in 8 years. What I have to say is like, okay, I believe both portions. I think that Stevie Y is not conscientious about he doesn't want to do 8 years, which is totally understandable. I do believe this deal will be done from what I've heard from Cindy, who she's talked to some pretty good sources. And from the sources I've talked to, look, we know who we're dealing with the Ottawa Senators. They have drawn out processes before. And what I was told earlier last week was, Ottawa's not given permission for the Detroit Red Wings to negotiate a contract. We've obviously heard that's recently happened with what Kevin Allen was saying, what Cindy was saying on the Red Alert podcast. And what we're getting to is the point of emphasis where now it's the contract negotiation part. And we know how Stevie Y takes the contract negotiations and what he has to kind of juggle. Obviously, we know Moritz Seider is due for a contract extension pretty soon. We know Lucas Raymond's due for a contract extension soon. So what Stevie Y is going to try to do is build the best possible contract for the Detroit Red Wings. At the same time, Alex DeBrincat's representation is going to try to get the best contract situation for their client, and that's what their job is. And both of them are doing their job of, Stevie Y is trying to do his job of, I want to get a suitable contract that be smart for the franchise, and Alex DeBrincat's asking for a lot, and it's not abnormal for this to get leaked out. You usually don't hear from the Detroit Red Wings getting it leaked out. It never happens from the Detroit Red Wings side, ever. It rarely happens from the Detroit Red Wings side. I know there's people that Cindy knows, and I know there's just it never really gets leaked out by the Detroit Red Wings unless it's already been leaked out. So from my inside, I've talked to people, especially a league executive, and he was telling me that Pierre Dorian didn't want to trade to Detroit because he didn't like Eisman. He doesn't want to trade in division, but he realizes that this is pretty much the only team that he can trade Alex DeBrincat to and get a pretty good return because of the prospects the Detroit Red Wings have, the draft picks the Detroit Red Wings have, the roster players the Detroit Red Wings have. And when we looked at free agency and we saw all the guys that Detroit signed, it made me think that Alex DeBrincat was definitely coming here. So there's obviously you hear these reports about Alex DeBrincat and how Stevie Y doesn't want 8 years and all that stuff. This is going to happen, and this is part of the game that you play in the sports business world. Is sometimes these things get drawn on way too long, and even the general managers will say that. If you ever talk to a general manager, they'll say the worst part is the contract negotiation part, especially with a good player, because this is what happens. We saw it with Dylan Larkin. We saw it with now we're seeing with Alex DeBrincat. Stevie Y kind of works his own way and does his own thing. Ultimately, this deal will be done. I'm fairly confident of it. My co-host on the Red Alert podcast, Cindy Berry, she's definitely confident of it. And Kevin Allen, he reported that Stevie Y is not fond of 8 years. At one point, he wasn't fond of the contract that he gave Dylan Larkin at one point. So you heard that on the Red Alert podcast from Cindy Berry. So look, this is what happens in the Detroit. This is what happens in the sports world, and I think people are kind of like, Steve, just get it done. Just get it done. Steve Yzerman has to look at this from a pragmatic approach. He can't go and just sign hog wild. That's what got us into this mess, guys. Ken Holland signed contracts that were just awful albatrosses and that really destroyed the Red Wings for a long time. And they're just starting to get out. And when you think about that, Detroit Red Wings are still paying Justin Applicator his contract. because they bought him out. That just goes to show you what happens when you don't think about the consequences. So I love the approach from Stevie Y. I know this deal will get done ultimately, and DeBrincat will be a Detroit Red Wing. So it's gonna be okay. If you're a Detroit Red Wings fan, just settle down. It's gonna be okay. Alex DeBrincat will be a Red Wing, and Dylan Larkin will finally get his first line winger that he's needed all his career. I think if Dylan Larkin gets that guy, you're gonna see another side of Dylan Larkin that you have never saw before, and I think that's gonna be the crucial part. So this deal will get done. I'm confident of it from talking to Cindy, talking to people I know, that this deal will be done pretty soon. And I think that you're just seeing the back and forth of what contract negotiations in sports really detail. We will see you in the next episode of Between the Whistles Detroit. Subscribe below. We'll keep you entertained through all Detroit sports seasons: Tigers, Red Wings, Lions, Pistons, Tigers, Michigan State, and some national stuff too. We're going to start doing some national stuff. So stay tuned here on Between the Whistles Detroit.